When you're considering the best video game adaptations, the Sonic movies definitely come to mind, and now we have a third film with Sonic the Hedgehog 3. For this latest Sonic installment, the big new inclusion is Shadow the Hedgehog, who is voiced by Keanu Reeves, who's very kindly as well joined us on the review today, and he was great as this character. Everyone thought his voice would be perfect for Shadow the Hedgehog. And Shadow, he got his backstory told in this film, and it was pretty, basic version of it. Which I thought is what they would go for, considering that they don't want to bog the film down with so much backstory. But I hope in the future we'll get more of that, and potentially even a Shadow the Hedgehog film or TV show, because there's so much more they can explore that they didn't do in this film. And also, considering that the director actually was someone involved with the game Shadow the Hedgehog, then I think there might be some possibility of that in the future. Because I love playing that game when it came out back in 2005, and so as a fan, it was just so great seeing him on the big screen. In terms of the story for Sonic the Hedgehog 3, it is pretty straightforward. We see Shadow break out of prison, he comes up against Sonic, Tails and Knuckles, Robotnik and Gerald, they get involved as well, and the Earth's future is under threat. So that's what you expect from this sort of movie. Like the first two films, they didn't want to overcomplicate the plot too much, otherwise the fan service, the action, and all these different characters appearing, you wouldn't be able to flourish as much. As I just mentioned, Gerald Robotnik is in this film, and he is played by Jim Carrey, so Jim Carrey plays two characters here, and he really does enjoy playing with himself. And if you are a Jim Carrey fan, that's great, but if you're not, then probably stay way clear of this movie, because there's a lot of those sort of antics and puns and those sort of jokes which you would have seen him do back in the 90s with a lot of those films he did back then. But this all gave me quite a few little chuckles, and I think adding Gerald into this dynamic was what I think Dr. Robotnik needed just for his character, because wasn't so sure what they're going to do with him in the third film, because he was the villain in the last two. But this was a great inclusion, and I think in terms of the biggest laughs, these two definitely provided them. So with big chunks of the film being taken up by Shadow and the Robotniks and Sonic, Tails and Knuckles, how much time is given to those human characters? Well, Tom and Maddie, they still get a good portion because they are quite involved in the overall story. But then you have some of the characters from the previous two films don't really have much time. But when we do see a couple of them return, I'm like, now I know why. Because if you remember in Sonic the Hedgehog 2, there was a whole wedding thing going on, which really sort of was like a side story in that movie. And I'm very happy a lot of those characters aren't back here, and we are focusing more on those Sonic characters. There is a new character played by Kristen Ritter. I thought she'd get a bigger role, but she is in the film, but I just thought there'd be more to her character, but it was still nice to see her. But how about the main three players of Sonic Team, Sonic, Knuckles and Tails? Well, as it is a Sonic movie, Sonic does have an arc. It does come into focus more towards the latter stages of the film, but as Shadow is involved here, there's a lot of that with his character where we're seeing the similarities and the differences between the two of them. But I thought that was handled well enough, especially when we get to those stages towards the final third. Knuckles, he's just there to sort of smash anything, like he's there to kick butt and ask questions later. And Tails, as the gadget guy, he does solve a few of the issues they have, and they work well as a team as they usually do. So satisfied with the content we got from these three. One of the big highlights in the Sonic the Hedgehog 3 trailer was seeing Shadow doing the Akira slide, and I think that action scene was definitely the best one. Having Shadow go up against Sonic, Knuckles and Tails in Tokyo at night with all the lights and the lights of the characters as well blending in, it just made for a great combination. And seeing Shadow on the bike as well and Sonic go after him as a ball, it was just great. I had a great time with that action scene in particular. There are other ones as well, but that one really stood out to me just because it had everything really going for it. I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Shadow, how the Shadow the Hedgehog game has definitely inspired some of this film, but also Sonic Adventure 2. That game, I think, is one of the best games I've played. It's definitely my favourite Sonic game. There's loads of references in this film for that game, especially when it comes to the music. There's a couple of music choices where I was like, yes, they included that one in particular. I think you know which one I mean. So yeah, and also the Chows, they even get an appearance in like a Chow Garden restaurant sort of thing. And I wouldn't be surprised, considering how Chows are like a merch magnet. They are perfect for merch and perfect for business when it comes to Sonic and these films. So I wouldn't be surprised in the future that the Chows become more of a prominent figure in the later films. So with Sonic the Hedgehog 3 being such a chaotic movie, there are a few things here and there which I could take or leave, and the whole little story with Agent Stone is one which I wasn't that bored about as much as the other ones. Like, we went back to that character a few times, I was like, okay, it's okay, but I'd rather get back to the other characters now. By the end of it, though, it does work out in a way, like how they conclude this little story. It does actually make it worthwhile being in the film, but that journey to get there wasn't the most enthralling compared to what we've got with the other storylines. Are there any major negatives that drag this film down? I wouldn't say so much major, but there's a few minor things in there. Lots of plot conveniences and times where you're scratching your head thinking, that makes no sense whatsoever. But with those, I'm happy to sweep them under the rug because I'm getting so much out from this film, I can forgive it on a few things here and there. Now let's take a quick moment to see how far we've come, because of course this was that original Sonic from that first trailer, who has now been branded as Ugly Sonic, who has even appeared in that Chip and Dale movie recently as well. And it just shows how fan input can change something from being a potential disaster to like a Sonic trilogy, which we've got now, which is incredible. And I think other companies might look at this as well and see if they can do something with it, because now fans feel a bit more of a responsibility because we've added in that ingredient to the stew, and if it comes out bad, then we've got a slight responsibility in that because we feel like we're more involved now. And so I could see a studio in the future, for example, designing a character looking terrible and getting the fan feedback, and they help change it to get that involvement. But I do feel that there is that connection now to this franchise from the fans, and you got to think these are fans as well who are very dedicated. The Sonic fans are incredibly dedicated and passionate for Sonic and for his story and the story of all the characters to be told in the most respectful way possible. And yes, a fourth film has been greenlit, so we'll be getting that in a couple of years' time. And there were a couple of end credit scenes in Sonic the Hedgehog 3. I'll give you a hint of what's to come in that next film. The first end credit scene was very good. The second one was sort of like a confirmation of what you already knew, really. But that first one was definitely worth sticking around for. I couldn't believe it. Some people actually left when the credits started. I was like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You missed one of the best scenes of the whole film.
This ain't over!
There are, of course, so many characters from the Sonic games that have yet to be introduced in the movies, and so there's quite a few different directions they could take when it comes to these next films. And I think it reminds me a little bit of Cobra Kai, because Cobra Kai on Netflix is based off the Karate Kid films, and they sprinkled in villains, through the different seasons. And I think that's a good approach. That means you can keep things going longer, and not just throw a load of characters in, straight at the start. And that's the good thing with Sonic. The first film, it was about Sonic and that connection with Tom. Then we bring in Knuckles and Tails. Now we brought in Shadow, who they're going to bring in next. But pace yourself, gradually introduce all these different characters. So I think they've got a great strategy, and I can't wait for the next one.
What are you waiting for?
I don't know, something amazing, I guess.
Looking now at the response from the fans and the critics, if we start with the first film just to see a comparison, so the critics score for Sonic the Hedgehog was 64%, 93% audience. So the audience loved the first film. Second one, I believe, is quite close as well. It's 69, 96, so even better with that one. How is the third one doing? Well, that one is currently sitting on 86 and 98, which is even bigger than the last one as well for the audience score. 86, that's great for critic score, obviously a big boost from the last two. I would probably, if I had to put any percentage down, I'd probably go closer to 80%. I'll give it like a 4 stars. I don't think it quite gets up to there, but this could be one of the peaks of this whole franchise. I hope there are better ones to come, but this was a real fun time, action heavy, full of what we wanted from a Sonic film. So yeah, I think this is a perfect film to watch over the Christmas holiday as well. It's come out at a great time. It's got Mufasa up against it. Mufasa I have seen, and I don't think it's as good as this film when it comes to like a family film to go and watch at the cinema. So I think it will do very well. I think it is on track to also get around $70 million in its opening weekend. So that's great for it as well, because I think the budget's around 120 million. So that'd be a fantastic start for the film. And yeah, Mufasa, again, I didn't mind Mufasa. I will actually get into that in review, so feel free to subscribe if you want to see that review, or if it's already out, feel free to check it out right now. So yeah, I had a fun time watching Sonic the Hedgehog 3, but in terms of my screening, my experience, there were quite a few kids there, which is expected, but there was also a couple of babies there, people bringing babies to the cinema. I was like, why are you bringing a baby to the cinema? That's just silly. I'm crying and that, obviously distracting a lot of people in the screening. And I thought to myself, hold on, As this is a film which obviously is going to be targeted to the family demographic and for kids to watch, but at the same time it is based on games which were, from years ago. People grew up on those games who are now in their 20s, 30s, 40s and higher. So it's like, well, couldn't you do like an adult screening? I feel like as there are quite a lot of game adaptations now and adaptations of things from yesteryear, which will appeal to not just kids of today but also to adults. Why not do an adult screening for that opening night? Just do an adult only screening, and that'd be fantastic. I think that could actually do really well, because a lot of people as well avoid the cinema because they don't want to be distracted by these different things like with kids and people banging their chair or babies crying, like I said with my one. So I suggest the cinemas on opening night do an adult only screening for films such as this, which will appeal to adults as well as kids. So what were your thoughts on Sonic the Hedgehog 3? Let me know all those down in the comments below. Also, what is your favourite Sonic game? I recently completed Sonic Frontiers. I thought it was a fun enough time, but there's also definitely room for improvement there. It seems like a good first step into an open world Sonic game, but there's definitely more they could do, and they took a few shortcuts just to get the game to be complete. But yeah, I thought it was fine, but definitely nowhere near like my top Sonic games. But I didn't use this, which was a code for some free loot, so feel free if you've never played Sonic Frontiers and you want to use a code, there is a code for you. There you go. Something you don't get from every Sonic the Hedgehog 3 review. But anyway, thanks for watching. Feel free to check out another video on screen, one for Craven Hunter, and also another one that YouTube has recommended for you.